That's going to be a long video. Probably no one will watch it all the way through. I wonder if I should break it into 2 parts. Or you can just skip around if you want. I don't mind. It's okay. Hey there, music fans. This is Peter Sco for Music is a Journey. Today's topic is going to be 13 albums that I really was impressed with at the time I heard them. Sounds pretty simple, but we're not just talking about favorite albums. If I'm talking about favorite albums, I could give you dozens upon dozens. I'm talking about albums when I heard them, it was like I realized there was a whole new set of possibilities. It was like a door opening to another room. Like I had a dream a few months back where I found a door in our house that I didn't know existed, and when I opened it there was this whole other room inside, and that room had doors leading to other rooms. So that's that kind of experience. Now I think everybody has albums or songs that they have heard that at the time they heard them they were just like, wow, I have never heard anything like this before. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. But of course for each of us the experience is different. It depends on what we have heard up until that point. And there are times where we hear an album and it's just too far down the road and it doesn't make any sense to us at all. If you consider like Back to the Future, when Marty McFly plays Chuck Berry on stage, the audience goes nuts because that style of rock and roll was just around the corner. It was almost going to happen. They already had a music base, experience of listening to music that set them up for that next step. However, when he starts playing more like 80s metal or Van Halen's type guitar solos, the audience is just stupefied and they don't know what the heck he's doing. So there are times, we hear a brilliant album, but it's either too early for us, we're not ready for it. And then there are other times where you already have the music base built up. So when you hear that brilliant album, it's brilliant, but it doesn't strike you as being anything really new and different. So anyway, the albums I'm going to talk about, these are very specific to my experience in listening to music. And before I get on with that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background before we jump into the very first one. So this here is a digital clock radio that I got when I think I was 10. It was either for my 10th birthday or for the Christmas that I was 10. I don't remember exactly. Initially I just used it for the alarm, and then later I thought I should probably listen to some music while I'm doing my homework. And my parents were into classical, jazz, easy listening. So when I first started listening to the radio, I just set it to classical music because I thought that's probably what I should listen to. But later on I found that classical music wasn't really drawing me in, and I decided to play around with the radio station, and I came up on the CFOX FM 99, Vancouver's rock station. So that was the beginning of my journey into rock music, and from there on I became aware of songs like Survivor's Eye of the Tiger, Jay Giles Band, Angel in a Centerfold and Freeze Frame, Alan Parsons Project, Eye in the Sky, The Police, various different bands that were scoring hits at the time around 1981, 1981 I guess it was. And finally I ended up choosing an album to ask for, I think it was for a Christmas present, which was called Rock 82. And I for all this time I've been believing that Rock 82 was a compilation of songs from 1982, but as it turns out, practically all the songs on that compilation are from 1981. So maybe it was Rock 82 including 81. But anyway, among those songs, I think I liked pretty much most of the album, but it was a variety of things like Pat Benatar, Hall & Oates, Huey Lewis and the News. But among those songs, there were some that rocked out a little harder, like Billy Squires, The Stroke, or Tom Sawyer by Rush, or Lunatic Fringe by Red Rider. And those were the songs that appealed to me a little bit more. Now around this time, a lot of my friends who had older brothers started introducing me to the music that their brothers introduced to them. And so I heard Black Sabbath, Turn Up the Night from Mob Rules. There was Van Halen, Running with the Devil from the Van Halen debut album. And there was For Those About to Rock by AC/DC. That was the beginning of it for me. AC/DC became my first band. For Those About to Rock, High Voltage, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. And then one day, a friend of mine said, hey, if you like this hard rock and heavy metal, you should check out a band called Judas Priest. So, the first Judas Priest album I got was Screaming for Vengeance. And this was because when I went to the store to take a look, I recognized this album cover. A friend of mine had an older brother who had a poster of Judas Priest on his bedroom wall, and I remember this album cover there, and then the 5 guys, and I remember looking at them and thinking, what kind of music do they play? So anyway, I picked this up, and I remember the same day my sister got Rick Springfield. And I went home and popped it in my little cassette player, like little sort of handheld cassette player, and the Hellion started. And just that beginning there, the sound of the guitars, the mood of the music, I thought, wow, this is something really different. Then Electric Eye kicks in with that opening guitar riff, and the song takes off, and I was just, wow, this is not AC/DC. Black Sabbath, Turn Up the Night is probably the closest thing, but even then it's not that. And then Rob Halford starts singing, and the guy comes in with like 2 different voices. I thought it was 2 different people. He starts off with that, up here in space, I'm looking down on you, kind of really smooth, cool lower voice. And then he's like, there is no true escape, I'm watching all the time. I thought, do they have 2 singers in this band? And of course later on there was the guitar solo, that totally blew me away. And then just when you think the song is going to go back to the chorus, because that's what AC/DC would have done, they suddenly go to this other section, which moves to another section, and then goes back into the chorus again. So that was something I hadn't really heard before. That was really brilliant. And of course there was then Riding on the Wind and Bloodstone with that opening guitar. Take These Chains, Pain and Pleasure. I just was really impressed with what I heard. And I remember my sister coming in and saying, so how's your new cassette? And I just said to her, I have never heard guitars like this before. Side 2, Screaming for Vengeance, the title track. What an incredible track, right up there with Electric Eye. And then they had this thing like, they had the guitar solo, the fast one, and then they did this slower, more melodic one. And then they just did this little part like this. Twice. And I thought that was really cool. And then they did this next part, and then it had this little diddle-diddle-diddle-doom, and went back into the main song again. And I just thought all these little touches that they put in, that was really different from, you know, AC/DC were more of a straight-up hard rock band, blues-based hard rock band. And they didn't have these like little transition things that they go through one part to go into the next part. Not like this. Then there was, of course, You've Got Another Thing Coming. And you know, looking at it now, I really appreciate the way not only Rob Halford, but the way singers use their voices to give us these feelings. Like in here, he was like out there is a fortune waiting to be had. You think I'll let it go, you're mad. You got another thing coming. Right? And then the next time he sings it, it's like, you got another thing coming. Like, he does that stab, 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 and then slide, drop. I thought that was just really neat. I mean, of course, I love Bon Scott from AC/DC, and Brian Johnson is awesome too, but this was just a different way of expressing vocals, and of course, different style of music. Fever on here also, I really like that song. And Devil's Child, yeah, it's alright. It's not as good as the others, but yeah, this album really impressed me. I became a Judas Priest fan. And of course, soon after that, I remember that their next album came out, and it was actually the very first concert I ever went to, Defenders of the Faith, when I was 13 years old. And this is still the t-shirt, which used to be black. And I think it has probably shrunk, because I'm pretty sure when I was 13 I wasn't exactly that small. But there it is, yeah. Metal Conquerors, Judas Priest. Okay, so that was my first really big wow album, was Screaming for Vengeance. So my music collection started building up with more Judas Priest, with Black Sabbath, Scorpions, Accept, Def Leppard, Quiet Riot, Motley Crue, anything that was labeled heavy metal that I could get my hands on, I tried to get a hold of it. And obviously it was a pretty modest collection for what was actually going on at the time. But you know, I had to get those things. Y&T, Iron Maiden, Crocus, whatever. Welcome, welcome. And then I started getting interesting in older stuff, because I realized some of the Judas Priest or Black Sabbath albums I had were from the 70s. So I started wondering more about when did heavy metal actually begin. And I started checking out bands like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. Now I'm pretty sure the first Deep Purple album I ever got would have been Machine Head. And I remember also being very excited about getting the first 3 albums on cassette. But the album that really blew me away at the time, and the album that I still consider one of my Desert Island picks. He's, of course, Deep Purple in rock. I'm pretty sure this is Deep Purple's rawest, heaviest, most in-your-face album that they did. It is, I mean, the guitar sound is not particularly heavy, but it's just really raw, like a chainsaw almost sound, and like more like a proto chainsaw. John Lord's organ is sometimes like a wildcat with this like wow 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 sound to it. When he's doing the solo in Hard Loving Man, it's like he intentionally goes off key just to give this kind of really warped, warbling effect to it. Ritchie Blackmore does an interesting job of playing these really raw, heavy, powerful guitar chords, and then doing these guitar solos that are really kind of clean picked, like do 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 do, you know, almost like a kind of jazzy thing to it. As well, he does some terrific shredding on here, like the big opening for Speed King, the original proper opening, if you've ever heard it, and of course Hard Loving Man. It's got the classic Child in Time, and basically 7 tracks, and I love all of them. Even songs like Living Wreck, A Bloodsucker is absolutely brilliant. Ian Gillan is really fabulous on here. I've heard times when Perfect Strangers came out, one review in a magazine said Ian Gillan's singing has become cleaner, or more recently with the Now What album of about 10 years ago, his wife said, well, he's singing better than ever, but I like him best on this album here. This also is considered by Martin Popoff one of the 2 first main heavy metal albums, along with Black Sabbath's debut album, both coming out in 1970, both taking a very different approach to the first wave of heavy metal, but no doubt this is really just one of those raw, heavy, aggressive albums which Deep Purple would never do again, even though later on they would actually do songs that might have been as aggressive or heavy, but not so raw as this 1970 sound. So this is an album that stays with me over the decades as a killer album that was just really impressive to know that in 1970 people were playing music like this. Wow. Okay, so my big show off for the next band, for the next album I'm going to talk about, is my Metallica Master of Pop Arts concert shirt, which was actually a concert I never went to. I had tickets to go to it originally. James Hetfield, I think he broke his wrist skateboarding. They canceled the show. We got our money back. And when they came around again, I don't know, I didn't go, but I asked my friend to buy me a shirt. Anyway, it was around the time that I was discovering albums by a label out of Canada called Banzai, which had a lot of really cool bands coming out of Europe or other bands in North America. They would have like Destruction and Voivod. I think Ruthless was on there. I was into Venom at the time. I was really interested in finding this more aggressive, I guess it was the beginnings of the extreme metal scene. And there was a band called Tyson Dog that I really liked for a couple of tracks on their album. And then I think it was the older brother of my best friend's classmate who said, you gotta check out this band Metallica. So naturally I did, and I picked up Ride the Lightning, and when this thing kicks off after the opening acoustic guitar, it just sounds like rocket fuel being pumped through in a musical rhythm, like through a wall of speakers. It was just an incredible sound. This, you know, the opening track here, which now I suddenly forgot, Fight Fire with Fire. It's just got that really fast. And I find it interesting listening to it again now that during the guitar solo it has this strange beat like this 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and when the guitar solo's done and it starts to go to this break before the opening riff comes in again, then it transitions from 1 2 3 1 2 3 to 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Just kind of neat the way the rhythm of the drums is going like that. And then, of course, you get to the title track, which is an absolutely killer song. And then the rest of side 1 has some interesting stuff with For Whom the Bell Tolls. That one, I think it was composed by Cliff Burton, actually. And it has this whole interesting, like, bass solo thing at the beginning. But it's played very high up, so I always thought it was a guitar for years. And he's got that bass riff, that dun 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 dun, which I love. Like, you hear it building in the background, and then the guitars come in with the bass, and it's just awesome. And it was very funny because South of Heaven by Slayer, my favorite song off that one there was Mandatory Suicide, which basically has that same riff, just sped up a little bit. Side 2 also had some really cool tracks. I always liked Trapped Under Ice. The way the guitar solos just erupt forth, like just wham, and then the guitar solos take off like that. Escape is kind of a weird one. Like, listening to it now, it sounds almost like a new wave of British heavy metal based song. However, apparently it was the record label told them they wanted Metallica to write a song that could possibly get played on the radio. Why do record labels always do that kind of thing? Creeping Death, of course, that is one of the big classics on here with that heavy riff, which is apparently Kirk Hammett brought that riff in from an old Exodus song that I think was never recorded, but that dun, 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 that was something Kirk brought in apparently. And then, of course, there's the Call of Cthulhu at the very end here, the big instrumental thing that they did. So Ride the Lightning really blew me away. The heaviness of the guitars, the speed, and the variety also with, you know, Fade to Black having this beautiful acoustic guitar, like classical acoustic guitar put in. It's an album that I really like because it impressed me for the extreme bits, but at the same time there's variety on here as well. It wasn't just, you know, blasting through the wall song after song. So Ride the Lightning was one of those albums that just really blew my mind. And bringing back Martin Popoff again, Martin Popoff says that Ride the Lightning is the kind of landmark album that re-intensifies heavy metal. You start with Black Sabbath and Deep Purple, you go to Judas Priest, Sad Wings of Destiny, reinventing heavy metal, and then you have Metallica's Ride the Lightning, re-intensifying heavy metal. So, great stuff. Okay, I don't have any paraphernalia to set up for this next band, but you'll notice in the background I've put up a black metal, Norwegian black metal book. This is because the band I'm going to talk about next is mentioned in this book and is actually a very important band for the black metal scene, the second wave of black metal. The band I'm going to talk about next is Bathory. Bathory's debut album and their album Under the Sign of the Black Mark, their third album, are often cited as black metal templates for the second wave. However, the album that I first picked up was The Return. Now, if you look at the cover, you've got a moon in the night sky with the clouds. When I went into the record shop, they had this heavy metal section for Banzai, actually, and I saw these album covers like science fiction, monsters, demons, big muscular, scary guys with swords. I mean, there was all this, you know, kind of violent imagery. This album was there, and I just thought, wow, that cover is really different. I want to know what kind of music these guys are playing. And even though at the time I was into Metallica, Slayer, probably even Celtic Frost, this album really took it to the next level as far as I was concerned. I mean, it starts off with that instrumental with like the background vocals just going like, rah, like demons coming up from hell, and this echoing, booming, thunderous like war drum kind of effect and weird guitar sounds. And then it just gets into total destruction with this really raw, heavily distorted guitar that sounds like someone is trying to use a giant buzzsaw to cut through metal pipes or something. Quorthon, his vocals, never heard anything like it before. I used to be able to do an impression of it. If I do it now, I'll probably start coughing. That whole song there, Total Destruction, was just wow. I mean, this is like somebody took Metallica and just like put them into like a meat shredder kind of thing and just pulled that out, and it's the vocals raw, the sound is raw, the production is raw. I mean, listening to it now, I actually almost feel like, well, I never noticed how kind of like how weak the production is, but it suits it, you know. The second song, Born for Burning, was one of the coolest riffs I'd ever heard. That with that really heavy guitar sound, and the bass is just kind of like going boom, boom, boom in the background. Just there's this like echoing, thunderous booming. It's so awesome. Now, the drumming is actually quite straightforward on this album. Most of the songs is just tap, 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 tap. Very simple 4/4 in a fairly quick tempo, but it does slow down sometimes. You get the one part where it suddenly changes gears, goes into this slower, heavy chugging riff, and then other times it'll speed up. But you get occasionally a transition where the drums will do something, like a fill or something, and it's like it stands out because the drums are so, I don't know, like even paced throughout the whole album. Tap, 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 tap. Other songs on here, like there was this one, oh, I forget the title now. It's 2 tracks together. It starts off with one and transitions into the other one, which I really loved. And then there was The Sadist, which does the same kind of thing. Starts off one way, and then it suddenly just goes into this riff like this. And then Quorthon like this, going along with the riff. Yeah, this really just blew the doors open for me. Like, wow, like heavy metal can go to this degree of extremity. That was incredible. And of course after that then you know, I got like Possessed, Seven Churches, and Creator, Pleasure to Kill, and so on. But Bathory remains as a band who just totally blew the doors open for me. And I later got their first album, which didn't have the same effect, and Under the Sign of the Black Mark I felt didn't have the same effect either. But after getting into Norwegian black metal and hearing a lot of the bands from the Norwegian black metal scene back in the 90s, I went back and got Bathory's debut album, and I realized, wow, like there is so much from this album that influenced that whole scene. In fact, most of the vocalists I heard sounded like Quorthon. So yeah, big applause to Bathory, and also of course Celtic Frost for the first wave of black metal, or extreme metal anyway, European extreme metal, and inspiring the Norwegian scene after that. Right, now here's another band I don't really have anything to show for. This was a band I got into. I remember I was in my first year of junior high school, which in British Columbia, that was grade 8. And I heard Queensryche and got their debut EP. And that song, Queen of the Reich, I thought was absolutely brilliant. I got the warning. It didn't have the same sound, but it had some really cool songs. And then we got around to 1986, and you know, the whole hair metal scene was really exploding. Bands were really getting into the makeup and the poofy hairstyles and the very effeminate look, you know, like Poison and Pretty Boy Floyd and that kind of thing. And Queensryche came out with Rage for Order, and when I looked at the picture on the back, I think I put a picture of the band here, it really blew my mind, because these guys were going for this whole kind of, I felt, sophisticated, futuristic type image, like intelligent type image. Their style was not all hairspray and lace kind of thing. They were doing something really different. And of course with Queensryche, the topics on the album are much more kind of socio-political, but almost in a kind of like novelist type sense, or even almost science fiction type sense. Like the Screaming in Digital is I guess the mind of the computer calling out to his master kind of thing. The song Gonna Get Close to You, I'd never heard anything like that. Like I imagined, you know, there was this other group of people in my junior high school. You know, there were the long hairs, the rocker types who listened to, you know, the hard rock and heavy metal. And then there was this other long hair type where the hair was all short around the sides and the back, but it was like long and on the top up here. And I think they listened to like a Skinny Puppy or The Cure and that kind of thing. And I felt that song Gonna Get Close to You would be something more closer to what they would listen to, which I thought was really cool. I might be totally wrong about it, but I mean, I thought it was really cool that a band I liked that was classified as heavy metal would put a song like that on their album. And of course there was another one, Killing Words. It started with this keyboard sound, this synthesizer, and back at that time there, I really didn't like synthesizer in my music. But the way Queensryche used it, I thought that's really cool, because again, it sounds like something from another genre of music that they are incorporating into a metal album. They're not putting synthesizer into a metal album, they're taking something from another style of music and putting it in. Overall, also like with sometimes there were some background voices, people talking or something, and the way they used acoustic guitar, the way they sometimes would have the drum sound differently, I felt that this was a band that was, again, taking heavy metal in a new direction, and no other band I had heard up until that point was doing something like that. So even though Operation Mindcrime is often cited as the big Queensryche album because of its conceptual narrative nature. This is the album here that stands out for me as the album by Queensryche that just blew my mind. Wow, a metal band is doing this and looking like that. Incredible. So of course, during my inspections of 70s hard rock and early heavy metal, I came across Aerosmith, and I became a fan of Aerosmith. I had quite a few, I think all their albums from the debut going up to Rockin' a Hard Place. And when Done with Mirrors came out, I got that one as well. However, it was interesting to know that Aerosmith were supposed to be making a comeback with Done with Mirrors. And as a hard rock album, it was a good album. There were some songs on there I really liked. But it was their next album that would really bring them back into superstar status, Permanent Vacation, produced by Bill Fairbairn in Vancouver, BC, opens with the sound of orcas from the Vancouver Aquarium, where of course I had been to before. I don't know if they still have orcas there anymore, but anyway, at the time they did. And this album was, at the time, it was really incredible because based on all the hair bands that we were listening to, I think even like with Faster Pussycat by this time, it's like Aerosmith showed them how to be really cool, how to write great, diverse songs, and just be awesome. I mean, when they did something bluesy, it was just, that's how you do it. The album, I find, it's, again, one of those incredible albums because it has such variety on it. I think also the timing, that they would bring an album like this out at that time in 1987. You've got the, like the hard rock songs, you've got the kind of bluesy, funky, groovy Aerosmith type songs on here, but they also have songs like Hangman Jury, which starts with this acoustic guitar and this rocking chair sound, and you've got like, what was the other one here now? St. John. I love that, the way it begins, like, come on boy, the tape is rolling. And then it starts off doom ba doom 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 ba doom 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 doom. And yeah, Hangman Jury had that lyric there like, "Whoop boy, don't you lie on the track like a whoop boy, don't you lie on the track." Like, Aerosmith can do that. Steven Tyler can do that. Sounds awesome. And then of course, because of Bruce Fairbairn's influence, gotta have horns. So there's saxophones on here, there's like a clarinet, you've got other woodwind instruments, which was just such a cool touch that we weren't really getting on other, like, you know, hair metal or blues-based Aerosmith influenced hair metal bands. We're not really doing it the way Aerosmith did on here. And it really, I think a lot of it goes to Bruce Fairbairn's influence. I did go to see the concert in 1987 in Vancouver. The interesting thing was that Angel, the big power ballad on here, was not yet released as a single at the time, so they didn't perform it live. And I've got this this program here, which I bought back in 1987. Still have it, Permanent Vacation Tour. There was one other song in here, This Girl Keeps Coming Apart. That was one of those upbeat, pumpy ones with the saxophones and so on. And I love the line, "There she was, buns up and kneeling. I was a wheeling and a dealing. My ace in the hole, so to speak." It's just so typical of Steven Tyler to sing something like that. Ragdoll, big one off here, and it was what, Dude Looks Like a Lady, which was of course also the big single off here. Really a brilliant album, I think. Way to come back with something that is totally earth-shaking. And then the follow-up album, Pump, I think was equally brilliant. But of course, following in the footsteps of this, so it didn't have exactly the same impact. Aerosmith, Permanent Vacation. Almost forgot to show this. Permanent Vacation. I saw the concert, I bought the program. I don't remember. I think I didn't buy a t-shirt. So I managed to get an Aerosmith t-shirt when Aerosmith came to Tokyo in 2000. And a special concert that was only for Asia, I think. So special set lists covering their career. And this was a really cool t-shirt, which I have only worn once in my life to pose in. And it has been in this plastic bag ever since. 21 years ago now. Anyway, next album. Okay, so as you can probably tell, by the latter half of the 80s, my musical tastes were all over the place. I was listening to extreme metal, I was listening to 70s and even 60s, like proto-metal stuff like the Yardbirds, Iron Butterfly, 10 Years After, Vanilla Fudge. And of course I was into the hair metal scene. I was into just pretty much anything that had like hard-hitting, distorted guitars. And back to the extreme metal thing, Voivod came out with an album in 1987 that was another one of those albums that was just unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I originally had gotten War and Pain, loved that album. It was just so interesting and so different from anything else I was getting in that area of heavy metal. I missed Roar, but when Killing Technology came out, this was really something different. Okay, extreme metal bands were usually going for the lower guitar sound and the kind of more distorted. This was raw and more higher toned often. Dennis Damore, aka Piggy, came up with some really interesting chords, and I guess the sound of the guitar coupled with the playing style, those chords just really stood out. Like, who makes this kind of stuff? The songs also seemed to keep transitioning. You had songs that would go to another part and go back to one part and then go to another different part and then go into some different part again before going back to another part. It was almost like the songs were just zigzagging. It wasn't just verse, chorus, bridge, you know, that kind of thing. The structure was more complicated. And the interesting thing is, listening to it again, I feel that there are times where the band is having a really hard time keeping up with the transitions. It's like the drums don't quite match up with the guitar doesn't quite keep up with the drums into one transition, and they're like just barely holding it together, and then they transition again, and then they've got it more together for that next one there. One of the things I loved about Voivod back in this time is every album would have at least 2 moments where Blackie, bass guitarist, would just have this small bass section. One part would end and the bass would come in, like with Tornado, for example. One part of the song ends and then boom, 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 and then the rest of the band joins in, right? Side 2 was for me even more incredible than side 1. I felt you have like Forgotten in Space, which is really like progressive metal, science fiction progressive metal at the time. But songs like Ravenous Medicine and Order of the Blackguards, there was a kind of hardcore punk feel to the vocals, like especially in Order of the Blackguard when Snake, Dennis Bélanger, is singing like, you know, burn, 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 and the guitar's like his vocal sound, I felt that is not metal. That's coming from probably hardcore or something. It's really different. So this album was a mix of heavy metal, but done in a kind of science fiction, almost mechanical kind of way, where the mechanics were kind of rattling and coming a bit loose at times, had this hardcore feel to it, and the whole progressive thing, which I still hadn't wrapped my brain around yet. It was just such a unique and interesting album. I actually have a t-shirt over there somewhere, which I was thinking to change into, but that's okay. Yeah, and this here book I introduced once before, No Speed Limit, Quebec Metal, 1964 to 89, the story of leading up to the whole Quebec metal scene, which after 1989 really took off. But there it is, Voivod, Killing Technology, one of those albums that just made me go, what? Wow, wait a minute, what are you guys doing? On with the video, a different day, changed my clothes, but I still got a few more albums to talk about. This one here is Sloan's debut album, Smeared, released in 1992. Around that time, I was really interested in exploring what was happening on the Canadian music scene, and my previous video was exactly about that, favorite albums of mine from the 1990s released by Canadian artists. Sloan was one of the bands mentioned in that video, a different album, but this one here was also a really important album for me. I first heard about Sloan by watching, when I saw them on a program called Ear to the Ground on the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which was about, I guess, new acts coming out in the Canadian scene. And I was really impressed with what I heard, because I'd never heard anything quite like it. Sloan came out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and they were part of the hardcore and, I guess to some extent, alternative rock underground scene that was going on in Halifax at the time. However, two of the members became interested in My Bloody Valentine, that whole shoegaze type scene that was going on in the UK. And so this album here actually bears a lot of that My Bloody Valentine influence on it. I had never heard of My Bloody Valentine. I'd never heard of shoegaze. At that time, 1992, the biggest thing was probably Nirvana and the whole grunge scene that was opening up. And I never really got into the grunge scene very much, but Nirvana I liked. And so when I heard that there was a Canadian band that was being called the Nirvana of the North, I was very interested in hearing what the rest of their album sounded like. Sloan were actually on the David Geffen label for the first two albums. This one here and another one. They had a song on a compilation, David Geffen compilation album, that also included song by Nirvana, Hole, I think Weezer might have been on there as well, a few others. Anyway, this album here, what I really like about it is, first of all, it does have this kind of indie feel to it to an extent. There's like, the harmonized vocals don't exactly match up in places, but they're making a really strong effort. There is that shoegaze sound. There's all this distortion going in the guitars. There's a lot of times there's feedback and just buzzing distorted chords coming in, but at the same time there are also proper riffs and proper guitar playing as well. I also find it interesting that all the members sing on the album, and for this debut, most of the lead vocals were done by Chris Murphy. However, Patrick Pentland wrote one song and also sang lead on another. Jay Ferguson wrote two songs and sang lead on them. And Andrew Scott, the drummer, also did some lead vocals on a track, sharing lead vocals with Patrick Pentland, and I think also, well, everybody, I think, sings on that one. So this was one of the important things for the beginning of Sloan, was that all members contributed to the vocals, and from the next album onwards, they tried as much as possible to have everybody contributing at least two songs, if not 25% each throughout the whole album. So anyway, here we have alternative rock, bit of a hardcore touch in places, lot of shoegaze influence, lots of strong melodies, harmonized vocals, interesting lyrics, and overall just a sound I had never really heard before, and I was just so pleased to know that a Canadian band was doing stuff like this. Where did Sloan go after this? Well, they changed direction for their second album, and that's where David Geffen Company really lost interest in them, because they wanted another smeared album. Who could blame them? I wanted another smeared album, but it's okay. Sloan they've covered a lot over the course of their career, and as I might have said in the last video, I really want to do a video just about Sloan. So I'm going to stop talking about this one right now. But anyway, Sloan smeared. I don't remember how it happened, but somewhere in the mid-90s, I became interested in checking out industrial music. And the big name that kept coming up all the time was Nine Inch Nails. So I went out to take a look. There was an album called The Downward Spiral, and then there was a slightly cheaper one called Further Down the Spiral. And since this was the slightly cheaper one, and I was kind of experimenting, I decided to get the cheaper one first. Now, of course, Further Down the Spiral is actually a bunch of remixes, mostly from The Downward Spiral. The Downward Spiral album, actually, I really like it. But this was my first taste of Nine Inch Nails and industrial music. And what I have found, listening to it again, what I have found that really impresses me about this album is, my impression of an industrial album was that it relied a lot on keyboards or electronica. And what I'm finding listening to this is that they have taken a lot of the actual instrument recordings, real guitars, real drums, real vocals, probably real bass and piano and acoustic guitar and so on, and they have manipulated the tapes in a way to make something that is unlike anything I had ever heard before I picked up this album. And honestly, any industrial or quasi-industrial album I have heard since, nothing really matches up to this. The closest thing would be The Downward Spiral originally. Now, these remixes were actually done by other people. Apex Twin, Coil, and a couple of others. They all had a go at these tapes. Trent Reznor sent the original recordings to these people, and they went ahead and reworked them. What I find is so cool, like I said, these are actual really live recordings, a lot of them, like live instruments, that have been manipulated. So you get vocals that sound like an airplane going like erase me like this, because they've just stretched out the whole erase me line. You also have these weird like contented bee sounds. I thought somebody is like puffing into a conch shell or something, whatever. You just get these like really bizarre insect sounds. There's also a guitar that sounds like an insect in one part. One of the remixes on here, it sounds like somebody's puffing into a plastic straw, for heaven's sake. And it just sounds so weird. Like, am I listening to somebody blowing into a plastic straw, or is this also a manipulated sound of something else? You have guitars that sound like a train engine starting up. There's this whole it's just like, wow, I really like what they've done with this here. There's one track they have like, it sounds like the Cylons from the original Battlestar Galactica are contributing vocals in there. There are, I think, some electronica things. There are also one part, it sounds like like work tools going whatever, and they've also been used in there. There are a couple of tracks in here that are actually original compositions that were put in as part of the downward spiral, further down the spiral theme, but actually are not using the original recordings from Nine Inch Nails. But I just find them all really interesting. So this album just is, for me, it's incredible what a bunch of people can do in the studio, taking somebody else's recorded works and just totally manipulating it to make some new version of these things. This album also includes a remixed version of the song Hurt, which was one of the kind of big ones off the album and was later on covered by Johnny Cash. That is pretty darn cool, I think. And I think it is the, oh gosh, now I'm looking at these with funny eyes again. There is one, it just starts off with this whole dialogue, which was on the original album, monologue actually, about putting a gun to someone's head, and, you know, I couldn't believe how easy it was. They put the gun to his head, lifetime of effing things up, gone in one determined flash. And then you just get this really weird instrumental thing going on with all sorts of weird sounds and the Cylon voices, and I don't know. And one of the other things, like, there's a part where the music is getting really aggressive, the drums are going and the guitars are really going, and the vocals are just like this soft whisper, nothing can stop me now, going over top all this aggressive music, which is slightly muted and pulled back a bit so that the soft whispered vocals go over top. Anyway, I could go on and on about this, but just let me say, this has been a big thrill to hear, even listening to it again recently. Anything else, Fear Factory, Frontline Assembly, Marilyn Manson, the Tea Party, anything else I bought that was said to be industrial, it's all good, but nothing impressed me ever as much as this album here. Okay, further down the spiral, Nine Inch Nails. Going from the mid-1990s up until around 2012, my musical journey continued, a lot with just keeping up with the bands I was already interested in, as well as going back and revisiting bands, like getting back into Judas Priest or AC/DC, going back to exploring the Deep Purple catalog, the whole Deep Purple family, as I did 2 videos ago. There were a lot of terrific albums, even coming to Japan and picking up new bands here. Artists, there were a lot of great albums, but it took a long time before there was an album that really made me think, wow, what are these guys doing? And it happened after I started getting into prog. I first really started exploring Rush's catalog, tons of great stuff on there. Then I got into Yes and Genesis, started exploring the more recent bands like the Mars Volta, Porcupine Tree, the Flower Kings. And then I picked up this one here, Rites at Dawn by Wobbler. Wobbler are a Norwegian band. They allegedly use only equipment and instruments that were used between 1967 and 1975. I don't know if that still holds true, but at the time that's what I heard it was. They released only one album every few years until recently they released a couple more really close together. Most of their albums are just really that typical classic prog sound. It's hard to say, is that Yes? Is that ELP? Is it something from the Italian scene? Is it something else? Is it something from the German scene? Hard to say. It's just beautifully done classic prog in a, with modern recording techniques, perhaps using the classical equipment. But this album here really stands out for me. First of all, I love the cover art. And secondly, this is the album that, as people have said, is more closer to Yes than any other type of prog. And I think it's because this album actually has a lot of like harmony vocals or like chorus vocals, whereas the other albums is mostly a single vocalist. The songs are also shorter. Typically their songs are anywhere, they usually have a couple of 10 to 12 minute long ones and then a 25 minute long one. This one here, the songs are basically between, I think, 7 and 12 minutes long. There is more to this than just Yes, though, because they include flute, they include, I think there's some saxophone, there are some cellos and violins. They play other instruments rather than just guitars, keyboards, bass, and drums. So I find there is more to this. It is closest to Yes's style, the classic style of Yes, which I really love. But it is also different enough that it doesn't sound derivative, say like a band like Cathedral, that American band from the late 70s, whose album I really think sounds inspired by Topographic Oceans and Relayer. So yeah, this album just made me think, wow, this is a modern day band that have got the classic prog sound really down perfectly. There are plenty of bands who are doing it, but this album here is one I just love to listen to from beginning to end. Now, the beginning and the end are these short instrumental tracks done with orchestral instruments, and then 5 remarkable tracks in there. One of them is maybe just not that remarkable, but the other 4 are really remarkable. So, I pick up this album fairly frequently, at least every couple of months, and listen to it again. Wobbler, Rites at Dawn. The next choice might seem a little bit unusual, but, and I almost didn't put it on, but the fact is that when I first heard it, I was really impressed with it. And every time I go back to it, I'm reminded why I was impressed with it. This is Herritage by Opeth, my first Opeth album. I don't remember why I thought to get this one and not any of the others. Perhaps it was exactly because at that time I was not into the extreme metal sound and the death growl vocals. However, as I've said before, it is Michael Ackerfeld who taught me that death growl vocals are actually really cool. But anyway, no death growl vocals on here. This was the big jump for Opeth to leave their extreme metal sound and fully embrace their prog sound, and in fact, I think take it even further than they had done on any of the previous albums. If you look at rankings of Opeth albums, as I did a few years back, just around the time Sorceress was released, I checked out the rankings of Opeth albums, and for heavy metal websites, this was the lowest ranked album, but for prog websites, this was often near the top. I remember I wrote a review for this, listening to it the first time and just typing on my phone in the notes what I felt from each song. And I remember thinking, or writing, who creates music like this? It just had so many unexpected twists and turns, so many weird tempos, and not weird tempos, weird time signatures, just constantly full of surprises. One of my all-time favorite songs, Famine, is on here. That one in itself just goes through so many different unexpected things, going from really, I don't know, sparse piano and vocals to kind of very heavy flute and kind of more bluesy, almost guitar feel in some parts. Yeah, listening to this album every time when I pick out at least 5 or 6 of the songs on here, I think, yeah, I am still really impressed with this. Herritage by Opeth. Alright, this album I talked about last year. This is Opulent Decay by Spell. Spell are a band out of Vancouver, and their second album is really an homage to 80s heavy metal. It is classic heavy metal in sound, and it is pretty damn good. But this is the album that got me into the band, and this, even though it was only released last year, still stands out for me. What I love about it is you've got this band that fully embraced classic 80s heavy metal, and then they went and added other 80s styles in. And I'm thinking, listening to it again the other night, if the sound of Rush, Moving Pictures, and Signals had sparked a whole movement in the same way that Master of Reality by Black Sabbath started like the stoner metal movement, if those Rush albums had done the same, this is probably one of the best albums that would have come out of that. And it is not because it's like Rush. It is still a power trio. They're not playing Rush music. They don't like have Rush chords or Rush vocals or anything like that. But just the general sound of the guitars, the sound of the recording. There's this 80s kind of echo to it in some places. A little bit of synthesizer here and there, but not so much. And just very interesting songs with kind of what, like a mysticism or pagan lore or something like this. Just very cool. One track is done... I cannot read this close anymore. I do need glasses, I think, one of these days. But one track is done as basically almost like a pseudo-Gregorian chant, but telling a story of two sisters who swam in the river and the current was too strong and the elder sister escaped, but the younger sister was swept away and drowned beneath the waves. And she says, "Tell not mother that I drowned, but rather that I have been wed to the river." Yeah. And there is actually one track on here, I think it's the second last one, that is again, an 80s classic heavy metal type sounding song. But this album just made me think it's really incredible that there is a band who can come up with making an album like this in 2020. And that is what sparked my whole quest for Canadian metal last year. This is the album that kicked it off, as I said, probably 2 or 3 times last year. Spell Opulent Decay. Still love it. The final album I want to mention is Abyss by Unleash the Archers, which just came out in August last year. This is the sequel to the story that began with Apex, and because it is a concept narrative duology, I'm actually going to talk more about that in my next video because I want to talk about concept narrative albums, my favorite ones. But in the sense of the music here, Unleash the Archers started out as a kind of melodeath band with growling vocals, male vocals, and then these female vocals by Brittany Slays. However, they very soon morphed into more of a power metal band, or traditional metal and power metal band. You can hear lots of people saying that Brittany Slays' vocal style is like the female version of Ronnie James Dio and Bruce Dickinson. And what I find so interesting is that on this album here, she has really used her vocals a lot. Like, their producer on the last album often said, "I'd like to do a different vocal line to put in here as a kind of subtext to the main vocal line." And this time, Brittany said, "I've got another one, and I've got another one." She had so many great vocal ideas. Also, this album was largely composed on keyboard originally, and they just decided, you know what, rather than just transpose everything to guitar, why don't we play a lot of it on keyboard as it was originally written? So there's this strong synthwave feel in here as well. So what you've got is a power metal, traditional heavy metal band playing with some synthwave and then doing all these beautiful layered vocals. And because one of the characters requires it, there is still that kind of harsh, growling vocals in some places, that kind of guttural, grrr kind of vocal style coming in here. So there's actually quite a combination of styles is what I wanted to say. But I just find it so impressive. Like, each song really stands out from all the others, and some of the songs here are just even more incredible than others. The harmonized guitar playing, the leads, the intensity, the melodies, the beautiful parts. This album is just fantastic, and I should have worn the t-shirt. I think I did in a video or two back anyway. But this album, I was so glad to see, got a lot of top 10 picks for the year 2020, and even some of them, it even got like top #1 pick, or Brittany Slays was picked for #1 female vocalist or whatever in a few lists. So I'm going to just throw a couple of these up here because I did screenshots just to show that this album not only really impressed me, but impressed lots of people who have something to say about it on the internet in important areas like music magazines and so on. All right, that wraps up 13 albums that I have heard in my musical journey that really impressed me so much. There, of course, are plenty of others that I love. There are plenty of songs and parts of albums that I think are brilliant. But those are 13 albums that just every time I think about them, I think, yeah, that is a brilliant piece of work. So there you have it. I will be back, hopefully not too long from now, with a video about my favorite concept narrative albums, so look forward to that, I hope. Thank you for watching yet another long video, and see you probably in a week or two. Alright everyone, take care. Christmas is coming.